Hey everybody, it's Justin and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have some out of this world inspiration to share with you today using some brand new products by scrapbook.com. So come, let's blast off and have some crafty fun. For today's card, I'm going to be using the Cosmic Shape dies, Astronaut and Rocket Shape dies, and the Shine Bright stamp set with coordinating dies by scrapbook.com. We're also going to be pulling in some fun pattern papers by scrapbook.com, including the Ombre pattern paper collection, Hooray pattern collection, and classic glossy cardstock to help put the different elements of our card together. What we're going to start with first is the glossy cardstock, and I am going to pull out a sheet of white glossy cardstock and a sheet of the black glossy cardstock. My thought was that with crafting up our little astronaut figure, that these glossy elements are really going to help amp up the astronaut's outfit and make it look a little bit more fun and realistic. Pulling out the Hooray pattern paper pad, I am going to pull out this off-white paper. In addition, I'm also going to pull out this earthier persimmon color that's included with the pack as well. And I'm going to use these for different elements of our astronaut's outfit. So once I have these 4 sheets ready to go, we're ready to get into laying out the different die cuts from the astronaut and rocket shape die set. Now, this astronaut really doesn't have too many details that are required. There's a couple narrow dies that you're going to need to use, but it's really easy to make this little fella come together. Once I have all of my papers coordinated with the necessary die cuts, I go ahead and process them through my Spellbinder Scout Rose Quartz die cutting machine, and I'm able to move on to assembling all the little pieces together. I do recommend using a pair of craft tweezers. Scrapbook.com has a fantastic pair of white craft tweezers, and this helps really to hold the different smaller die cuts into place as you're putting liquid adhesive on them and making sure that they properly adhere to your project. Like I said, there's a couple smaller die cuts that you're going to need to use to make your little astronaut come to life. It really doesn't take that much time though to put this little cutie together. I like to use the black glossy cardstock for the screen of the astronaut's helmet, as I think that it really promotes the reflectiveness that it would have in real life. I am also going to be using that earthy persimmon color for the little earpieces for the astronaut. I like to think that these are little telecommunication pieces that he can use to coordinate with home base back on Earth or even his spacecraft that he had come down from. I'm going to use that same earthy persimmon color when it comes to the gloves and for the boots, and I am using a craft tool to help get those nicely into place, using the waxy side to pick the little elements up, and then also using the pointed side if I have to slightly move it around at all as well. When using liquid adhesive on this glossy cardstock, you do get a little extra wiggle time because of the surface of the paper being really smooth, so when you're using it with the liquid adhesive, you get a couple extra seconds to make sure everything is nicely into place. There are a couple little narrow pieces that go by the arms of this astronaut, and they help define the arms so they don't just blend in with the blob of his body. So I'm making sure to carefully put those in place where they need to go to make it look like our astronaut's got some little arms that are almost like separate units from the die cut itself. Lastly, there is a little telecommunication center that goes on his chest. I've die cut that from the black glossy cardstock, and after I have that nicely into place, we have the most adorable little astronaut ready to go for our card. After we have them situated, we're going to use the Ombre pattern paper collection to pull out a handful of different patterns that we're going to use to build the background scene of our card. I'm pulling out a dark pattern, a almost like blue green to dark blue pattern, a pink and green pattern, a light yellow to dark yellow pattern, and then a orange and pink pattern as well. We're going to create a background by using the dark pattern ombre, and we're going to use it with some paper splatter by Picket Fence Studio. I'm starting with some opaque white paper splatter, and I like to put it on an acrylic block first, and then I am going to use a clean watercolor brush to pick it up and start the process of splattering it onto our background to help create a galaxy feel. I do like to always stress, use a clean brush when doing any sort of paper splattering, because if your brush is dirty, you're going to cross-contaminate colors. Once I am finished with using the white, I'm going to use some opaque gold paper splatter because I always like to add an element of either like a yellow or gold star to my galaxy skies. I think that it just adds a really fun dimension. It sort of changes the temperature of some of the stars in the sky, and I think it's just going to work really well for this project. So I very carefully put all of my gold splatters onto my project, and once I have everything nicely in place, I'm going to show you just a little bit how everything looks on that ombre background, and I'm going to set it aside to dry to use later on in the project. I'm going to now work on the different planets and stars that we'll be using to build the background of our card. So what I'm going to start by doing is just pulling the different die cuts from the Cosmic Shape die set and pairing them up with different ombre patterns that we had pulled earlier during this tutorial. I'm starting by pulling off all of the star images. I believe I counted, and there are 4 or 5 different stars that you're going to be able to use on this card to really create a beautiful background scene. So I'm pulling most of them out, and I'm going to end up tacking them onto my cardstock with some mint tape. I'm fumbling around a little bit, but we get there in the end, and I also start to pull out some different ombre patterns to use with the different planets. So like I said, I'm going to keep on using some mint tape to ensure that I get all of my planets nicely tacked down to the paper of choice. And let me tell you, I really love using all of these different ombre papers to create these planets. I'm really big into ink blending, and it's almost like a hack because I'm not going to have to do any ink blending because there's already going to be a variation of color using these different ombre patterns of paper. So it's going to save me a little bit more time, and I know in the end this background and these planets are going to look absolutely awesome even if I don't ink blend them. So I'm just making sure to get everything in place so that I use all of the different areas that I'd like to use. And I'm going to die cut it through my rose quartz platinum scout as well so we can move on to the assembly portion of our card. I do end up assembling all of our planets off camera, but here you're going to go ahead and see all of the different elements that I've prepared for our card so we can begin putting our card together. We do, of course, need a sentiment, and for our sentiment, I am going to break out the black mixed media paper pad in the A2 size by scrapbook.com, and I'm going to get it ready in my rose quartz Misty by putting it down with some magnets and using a magic anti-static tool onto the paper to ensure that my heat embossing goes off without a hitch. I'm going to put my powder down, and then I'm going to pull in the Shine Bright stamp set, and we are going to use the sentiment that says "Reach for the Stars." I just think that this sentiment is so perfectly paired for our card. It pulls in all the different elements that we're going to be using, and I love that it's going to send a little bit of encouragement to a loved one as well. So I'm going to position it onto my paper, close the door of my Misty, and then pull it up to put some embossing and watermark ink on it. I'm using a pad by Pink and Main, and we're going to use this for a nice embossing impression after we put our embossing powder on it. So I do get a nice impression onto my paper, and I pull in some frosting embossing powder by Pink and Main. It's a fantastic white embossing powder that I often pull out of my stash to use for different projects. So I put it onto my paper, shake off the excess in a nice little piece of scrap paper, and I do some heat embossing off camera. I then pull out the coordinating shape dies for the Shine Bright stamp set and put it over our sentiment to begin the process of die cutting it out. I love that this stamp set comes with coordinating dies for the sentiments because it just makes them look so nice and clean cut, and I know that this sentiment is going to be an absolute perfect addition to our project. Now for the last time in this project, I'm pulling out my rose quartz platinum scout machine, and we're going to die cut out our sentiments so that we're going to have all of the elements ready to go for our project. So here you can see how that sentiment is going to be perfectly placed onto our project, and I just like to map everything out before I commit to adhering it onto our project. None of these elements are adhered down yet. I just kind of like to map out where each of these planets are going to go, because once I adhere them down and they're set onto the paper, I'm not going to get the opportunity to move them at all. So if I change my mind with anything, I'm going to be a little bit out of luck. So now that I'm happy with where everything is going to go, I'm going to use some liquid adhesive to put all of the different elements into place. Now, as you can see, I am using the different elements to go off the panel, and I'm doing that because I think it really is important for a scene to make it look like it goes beyond what you can see in the card itself. I don't like making everything look like it's contained just within my little scene, so that's why you see me now trimming off the excess with these little bits just to sort of make it look like each of these planets and stars carries out. I do recommend, though, save these little bits. You never know when you're creating your card if you're going to have to pull in different elements to fill a corner that maybe you didn't plan for, and those little trimmed die cut pieces can definitely come in handy on your project. Now, once I've got all of my planets and stars in place, I'm going to pull out some 3mm foam strips that I'm going to use on the back of our astronaut and on the back of our sentiment as well. I am a huge proponent of using foam tape for any sort of project when you have a focal point that you want to attract the attention of your recipient. Definitely for this card, I think that the astronaut and the sentiment are the most important features, so that's why I've chosen them to put some 3mm foam tape on. And let me tell you, I just love that scrapbook.com comes out with these foam strips. They're super nice and narrow. I only have to trim them down to size. I never have to make them any sort of like less wide. They're always the perfect width. You know how some tapes are like half an inch thick, maybe even a little more, and you may have to trim them lengthwise and widthwise? Yeah, never have to worry about this with these foam strips. They're super nice and narrow. They're about a quarter of an inch, and I use them on so many of my projects. I am putting our little astronaut into place sitting on top of a planet. I figured he's just sort of waving bye to any spacecraft that may be passing him, sort of like just greeting people as they fly through the galaxy. I'm also putting foam tape on the back of our sentiment that says, of course, reach for the stars, and I'm getting it nicely in place for our card. Once I'm happy with where all of my elements go, I decide that I want to bring in a little bit of embellishment. I recently acquired a couple variations of sparkle spots by Trinity Stamps, and I decided to use the holographic gold sparkle spots for this project because I think that they're going to coordinate really nicely with the opaque gold paper splatter that we have splattered earlier in this project. So I'm going to use some liquid adhesive, dot where I want each of the sparkle spots to go, and then use different sizes of these holographic gold sparkle spots onto our project as a little bit of extra embellishment. I don't put too many onto our card. I want to say if I count, it's maybe 5 to 7, somewhere in that range. And it's the perfect amount of sparkle spots because I don't need to do too much. There's already a bunch of planets and stars going on and all of those splatters in the background as well. Once I'm happy with all the placement of all the sparkle spots, I adhere my panel to an A2 size card base that I prepared, and my card is fully completed. I just think that this card is going to give the recipient the biggest smile when they get it, and I think it's just absolutely adorable with that little astronaut sitting on a planet. I wanted to thank you for stopping by my channel today for some interstellar inspiration. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to follow me on all socials at Justinote by Justin. I do have all of the links below for the products used in today's tutorial, so if you feel inspired and inclined to make any purchases, I really appreciate you using the links below as they help support me in my crafting at no additional cost to you. Thank you again for your support and stopping by, and I can't wait to craft with you real soon. Goodbye.